hurry up. Please hurry up. Okay, give me a description. Hey, ma'am, listen to me. He's black, white, or Hispanic.
Just a few hours after that haunting 911 call was made, the woman who made it would be found dead in the trunk of her own car. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Lindsay Nichols. Viewer discretion is advised. On the morning of June 21st, 2015, at 6:17 a.m., a man spotted a car parked on the side of the road. It appeared to be out of place, but nothing else seemed out of the ordinary. 43 minutes later, another person witnessed a man standing above the trunk of that same car. Again, nothing really seemed totally abnormal about it. At 7:16 a.m., a 911 call was made because someone else had witnessed that same car with fire and smoke billowing out of it. Firefighters arrived, they put out the flames, and they noticed that the source of the fire seemed to be coming from the trunk. They pried the trunk of the car open, and inside was a body. It was the body of a young woman, and it looked like she had been through absolute hell. Later on, the coroner would determine that this young woman had been shot multiple times. She had been manually strangled by someone's hands, and then she had also been beaten in the head. So police would look up the car registration information, and they noticed that the car belonged to a woman named Lindsay Nichols. And on the side, driver's side door, they looked inside one of the little cubbies, and they noticed an ID, and it also said Lindsay Nichols. And the picture on the ID matched the woman they found in the trunk. New Orleans, Louisiana. A hotbed for partying and young people to frolic about and do fun little deeds with beads. Ugh. Nightlife and partying obviously is kind of like the scene down there. And from what I understand, it always offers an experience that you'll never forget. I've never been to New Orleans, but I would probably love to visit it one day. At approximately 9 p.m. on a very hot, sticky June 20th night of 2015, a group of friends was getting ready to head out for a night on the town. 31-year-old Lindsay Nichols was a mother of a 9-year-old child. She was a single mother, and she was described as just being a one hell of a mom who would literally do anything for her kid. She worked like nonstop. She was described as someone who was basically a busy bee who would never stop working and never was off the clock. She worked as a timekeeper for a construction company, and she would have to like bounce around the country a lot. So she was sort of living in Texas, but then she was visiting New Orleans just to see some friends and just take a break. But she worked so much because she really wanted to make sure that her son really had everything he needed. But yeah, she was just there this night to just let her hair down and have a wild night with some friends. She was described as the life of the party. She was certainly not a shy person, and she would always stand up for her friends if there was ever some kind of like argument or fight. But she was also really hilarious, according to her friends, and she would make everyone laugh. But overall, she was just a really, really popular person, and she had like this massive group of friends. So at approximately 10:30 p.m. that night, Lindsay and one of her friends would arrive at the first location they would go to that night. And that location was a place called Gabby's, which was I guess a popular sports bar down there. So she was hanging out, having some drinks, dancing, catching up with some old friends that she hadn't seen in a while. And And then at around 11:15 p.m., they decided to leave that bar and go to the next place. The next location was called Spice, some kind of nightclub, I guess. When they were there, Lindsay and her friend Jessica had met up with another friend of theirs. Her name was Melanie. And then they also met a friend of Lindsay's who would go by the name of Bam. Yes, Bam. Sometime around midnight, the friend that Lindsay started the night with, Jessica, she decided she was going to head home for the night. So Lindsay was her ride, but Lindsay wanted to stay out more. So Jessica just found another way home. At about 1 o'clock in the morning, Lindsay then leaves Spice, and she goes now with Bam and Melanie to another place, a cheap, I guess, strip club called Passions. When they're there, Lindsay runs into someone that she had met before. His name was Theon Sampson, and Theon was there with his friend, and his friend's name was Troy Varnado Jr. And then at some time a little after like 3:45 or so, Lindsay and Bam leave Passions, basically to call it a night. So Lindsay leaves specifically with Bam because she was supposed to drop him off at his car. So they say goodbye to Melanie, and Lindsay and Bam leave the club. Several hours later, at 7:17 a.m., the 911 call is made to report that a car on the side of the road is on fire. And of course, as we know, it is Lindsay Nichols' car, and inside the trunk was her body. She is shot in the neck and in the face. She is strangled. She is beaten, and her body is partially burned. But the fire never really took off, so there really wasn't much damage to her or the car in terms of fire. When the medical examiners finally have the body removed, they notice that the gun was lying underneath her. And the gun was also partially burned. And then when they inspect the front seats, they notice that there is a white plastic bag with bloody items inside. Inside that bag, they notice there is a white tank top with blood. There is a pair of red basketball shorts with a dark, what appears to be blood stain. And then there are some tube socks with blood on it as well. So police would then begin processing all the evidence from the crime scene. They would bring the car back to the station to have it further examined. Meanwhile, detectives start questioning all of the people that Lindsay was with the night before, her friends, and her friend Melanie said that the last person she saw Lindsay with, the person she saw leave Passions with, was their friend named Bam. And as far as Melanie knew, as far as anyone knew, he was the last person to see her before she was found dead. So, according to Melanie, the plan was for Lindsay to drop Bam off at his car, and then she did not know what the plans were after that for Lindsay or Bam. So, now police need to track down Bam. Where the hell is he? What does he know about any of this? They eventually track him down and get an interview from him. He tells the same story that Melanie gave. He even says, yep, I got into Lindsay's car. She dropped me off at my car, and then after that, we went our separate ways. Bam says he went to a convenience store to get some snacks, and then he went back to his house. So police, he had a receipt, so he proved with the receipt he went to the convenience store. They also confirmed with CCTV cameras that he was there when he said he was. And then luckily for him, right across the street from where he lives is another convenience store that had a pretty good CCTV system, and it actually picked him up going into his house and never leaving it. So police were able to confirm that Bam was home the entire night after Lindsay dropped him off, and so they knew he had nothing to do with her murder. So, now, back at the lab, they are now processing the shirt, the shorts, the socks, and the blood on those items, and the blood on those items is confirmed to be that of Lindsay Nichols. And then they also swabbed the inside of the shorts and the inside of the tank top because odds are especially nowadays with today's very, very advanced technology, that they could swab those and collect at least skin cell DNA. And they were able to develop a male profile for whoever was wearing the shorts and the shirt. But they weren't able to match it to anyone because when they ran it through the system, no one came up. On July 15th, so we're talking almost a month after her murder, police are finally able to acquire Lindsay's cell phone data. And through that, they discover something truly haunting. At 4:48 a.m. on that morning of June 21st, 2015, just 3.5-ish hours before she's found, she made a 911 call that lasted roughly 8 minutes. So police go to the center where the police calls are stored, and they find that call. And this is that call. And I just want to give you a heads up. The following call may be disturbing for some.
Okay, give me a description. Hey, ma'am, this is him. He's black, white, or Hispanic. Listen to me. We have a unit. Put the gun down and give me my keys.
Also on that call, you can reportedly hear a man demanding that Lindsay opens her mouth so that he could put his gun inside of it. They also realize that it's pretty obvious there are two male voices, and actually I believe during the call, Lindsay confirms there are two men outside of her car that she is trying to prevent from getting in. It's then followed by more screaming, then some moaning, and then the call drops. The portion I played is the only portion of the call I could find, so I don't have the entirety of the call. And by the way, I pulled that clip from a show called Murdered by Morning, which is on Peacock. Here is the beyond frustrating as fuck part of all of this. The call lasts about 8 minutes. For some reason, the dispatcher does not even dispatch the call to an officer until the end of the call. So there is an 8-minute window of time where this woman is clearly struggling. She is needing help immediately. There is a gun involved, and the dispatcher waits until the call is over to send someone. And on top of that, she does not tell the officers that there is a gun involved. So the sense of urgency isn't as high. So they get there several minutes after that 8 minutes is up. And by the time they get there and they search around the area for 10, 15 minutes, there's no one in sight. If she was there, she's now gone. Had the dispatcher sent it to an officer within 30 to 45 seconds, I may not have a rest of the story to even tell. This so much possibly could have been avoided. But unfortunately, we'll never know. Now, the dispatcher in question, after all of the dust was settled, when all of this was solved, the dispatcher was investigated, and during that investigation, she decided to resign. So this phone call obviously would go on to haunt everyone involved in this case. It would haunt the detectives, the family, her friends, because she was begging for help and they didn't send it. On the phone call, Lindsay stated that, like I said, that there were two black men involved, and she stated that one of the men she had only actually ever met one time before, and the other guy she had never even seen before. So investigators go through her cell phone records to see if she made any texts or phone calls that morning before the 911 call. Between 4:11 a.m. and 4:18 a.m., she made two different phone calls to a phone number that police would eventually be able to trace, and found out it belonged to a man named Theon Sampson. And if you remember, that is a man that she had interacted with several hours earlier that night at one of the clubs. According to her friends, Lindsay met Theon 3 months prior to this murder taking place. And she met him at a club, specifically a club called the Tiki Hut, where he was a male exotic dancer, where his stage name was Bonafide. I guess that they exchanged numbers and they texted from time to time, but they never actually met up or anything. And then 3 months later, on the night of June 21st, they would run into each other again. So, police are able to give him a phone call, and he agrees to meet them at the police station for an interview. He confirms, and he's very cooperative, he confirms that he, in fact, met Lindsay that night, and they had a brief conversation, and they said, let's catch up later at some point. But that was about all the interaction they really had that night. Theon then tells police that after the club, he went back to his apartment where his girlfriend was, allegedly. And then later on that evening, his friend that he was with earlier, Troy Vernado, he came over to the apartment and they hung out. But they did not see Lindsay at all after the club. The detective tells him, well, because I guess Theon said he gave Lindsay a hug earlier. So the detective says, well, listen, since you gave her a hug earlier, you'll probably have transferred some, skin cells over to her. Can we please just take a quick swab of your cheek just so we get your DNA, just to rule you out, blah, 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 blah. And Theon says, yeah, that's fine. Go ahead, take it. So they take a swab and collect his DNA. He came off extremely relaxed. Again, he was very cooperative. He did not give any signs of possible guilt in any of this. But they let him go, and So then they would take his DNA and they would run it against the male DNA profile they found inside the clothing. And this took some time. This wasn't like an overnight thing. But eventually it would come back as a match to Theon Sampson. So the person wearing the clothing that night, the clothing that had Lindsay's blood on it, that was in Lindsay's burning car with her body, was that of Theon Sampson. They even found a photo of Theon on Instagram, and the photo was of him wearing the exact outfit they found in that bag, the white tank top and the red shorts. So they have now basically solidified his direct connection to the murder of Lindsay. And through that, they were able to get a warrant, and they arrested Theon Sampson for the murder of Lindsay Nichols. But police knew at that point there were 2 men on that call that they heard. Lindsay said there were 2 men, and so they wanted to know who the second man was, because this person was very much involved with the struggle taking place inside that vehicle. So they get a warrant to search through Theon's cell phone records, and they notice that he is in constant contact with a friend of his, pretty much that entire night, off and on texting and calling, and it was his friend, Troy Vernado. Now, remember towards the beginning of this video where I said that one of the witnesses around 7 o'clock in the morning saw a man standing over the trunk of her car on the side of the road? Well, the man would give an ID, and that was, in fact, he confirmed it was Theon Sampson. But he also said parked right by her car was a Jaguar. And that Jaguar had another person behind the wheel, a black male. And he couldn't get a good look at him, so he couldn't really describe him other than very, very basic features. So police find out that Troy Vernado owns and drives a Jaguar. So police first then go back to Theon, now that he's arrested, and they begin to present kind of all of this to him. Suddenly, he's ready to talk, and he starts flapping his gums. He says, listen, Troy is the one who killed Lindsay. That he did it, and the only thing I did was I helped him, hide the body. So I'm guilty of that, but I'm not guilty of killing her. I had no involvement in that. And then they finally get a warrant to arrest Troy Vernado, and then he says the exact opposite. He says, listen, I was just there to help dispose of the body and help him clean up. He was the one to kill her. And they did this back and forth nonsense, basically pointing the finger at each other. But ultimately, because you could hear both men clearly on the call, and because Lindsay ID'd that there was two men in the car during this physical fight, they are both involved in the murder. I mean, at that point, they really couldn't distinguish who pulled the trigger. They couldn't distinguish who beat her and who strangled her. For all they knew, it could have been both of them did all of it together. Could have been one who did some, the other one who did the other stuff. Like, they don't know. But they're both involved. They both killed her. And they both were responsible for trying to burn her body inside of her car. So, detectives come up with their theory of what happened that night after Lindsay dropped Bam off at his car. They determined that at 4:18 a.m., the final interaction between Lindsay and Theon on the phone, she drives to his apartment. And the plan for them is to hang out. Who knows? She arrives at his place sometime around 4:30 in the morning. And when she goes inside, it's literally just Theon. But then all of a sudden, they believe that this is when Troy Vernato comes into the apartment because Theon had invited him over. And they confirm this by looking at the text message exchanges where Theon texts Troy, she's here now. So this was like a planned thing? For what? Oh, probably for a boinky boink time with three of them. So a three-way was likely planned. So police then theorized that Lindsay's like, no, I'm not doing that. Are you kidding me? And then she's trying to rebuff them, and they're probably likely trying to convince her or force her, and then she manages to get away, and she runs towards her car. She gets in the car, but at some point she somehow drops the keys, because you can hear her on the call saying, just give me back my keys, that kind of thing. And then from there, they manage to get inside the car after she's no longer to hold the door closed. So she lost that fight, and they got in, and the rest is history. Both men were officially charged with kidnapping, obstruction of justice, and second-degree murder. Now, Theon was actually offered a deal. They said you could take manslaughter and take a 40-year flat sentence. And he agreed. So he did not go to trial, and he was sentenced to 40 years without parole. So he has to serve all 40. And by the time he gets out, he'll be in his 70s. Troy, on the other hand, didn't want to take a deal. He said, no, we're going to trial. And that's exactly what happened. And with all the same charges, he was found guilty of all of them. And he was sentenced to life in prison without parole. And, yeah, that's the end of that one. The biggest takeaway here is that 911 call. It's heartbreaking to hear, because you can hear that she knows she's about to get brutally attacked, possibly killed. She is begging for help, and they take way too long to send it. Why on earth would this dispatcher wait the whole 8 minutes to send someone and then not tell them about the gun and the weapons involved? So, like I said, I mean, even a few more minutes earlier possibly could have saved her life. If she had just dispatched that officer right away, we could have a whole different story here. But unfortunately, like I said earlier, we don't get to know that. We don't get to know what would have happened. Personally, that dispatcher got away with it like something easy. Slap on the wrist. She left her job. And that's it. I mean, I have very heated opinions, and I'm like, maybe we should arrest that dispatcher too, because I feel like she was culpable in that murder for not helping her. And I think the other takeaway too is, I've mentioned this in videos before, I think it's nowadays always the best idea, if you're going to be going somewhere that you're not typically used to going, or you're maybe meeting someone for the first time, I would say always tell someone, at least one other person, tell your closest friend or family member, like, hey, just so you know, I'm going over to this such and such house. Here's the address where I'm going. Here's the person's phone number. Here's a picture of what they look like. Like, I don't care if it's invading that person's privacy, because if that could save your life, you should do it. Make sure you always tell someone where you are going, exactly where you're going, and who you are seeing. Always. At least one person. Pretty please. Because that could save you. Honestly. If you don't know the person you're going to go see, at the very least, it could help police find you or catch the person who did whatever they may have done to you. So, yeah. And touch everything. Touch everything. Pull your hair out. Like, just leave yourself behind. Like, I know that's a little, sounds a little much, but you know what? If it helps, do it. So, yeah. That is the end of this case. I hope you found it interesting. As usual, if you want to see much shorter form cases from me, you can head on over to my TikTok, also named Making a True Crimerer, where I have thousands more videos over there for you to watch. So yeah, go ahead and give me a follow. We're really close to 3 million followers, so that's pretty cool. Second, if you have a case you would like me to cover, please email me at mikey@truecrimerer.com. That'll be listed below. But before you do, go to my case list. So go to my link tree in the description below, then find the Crimerer case list, and then scroll through the names or search for the name you want me to cover. And if you do not see it, then email me the name, where it happened, when it happened. If you see the name on the list, please do not email me again. I get inundated with emails and it takes me forever to get through them. So just to help save me some time. Yeah, and lastly, if you want to support me in any way, we do sell merch also in the link tree below. T-shirts, hoodies, we sell mugs and wine glasses. We will be selling Christmas ornaments here very soon. They were a big hit last year. Yeah, so you can go ahead and support me if you want that way. And until next time, true crime-a-roonies, I shall see you to infinity and not beyond the... Sometimes I just need to stop.